Hello and welcome to NIGP's Learning Lab. Today's session is Manage Risk and Change, hosted by Richard Pennington with special guests John Adler and Lourdes Koss. Richard has over 35 years of experience in public procurement law and leadership in the U.S. Air Force and state government, 7 years of which was in private law practice. He helps in development and facilitation of NIGP's Pathways courses. Richard is co-author of the third edition of the Legal Aspects of Public Procurement and author of Seeing Excellence, Learning from Great Procurement Teams. Richard, would you like to get us started?
Yeah, I would. Thanks, Justin, and welcome everybody. This is the 8th in a series of 10 that NIGP has created called Creating Excellence. We've been through 2 parts to the book, really. One was on helping the team expand its thinking. The next was focusing the team's attention, where we talked about project management, team development, measurement, process analysis, several things. And a few of you I recognize have been on some of those, and that's cool. We're starting the last portion of this with the 8th lab. This is called Manage Risk and Change, largely for help with teams in developing ways to sustain their efforts. And one of those we're going to talk about today is the components of risk and change. What we're going to do today is touch our objectives here, which are, one is to let you try a pre-mortem. That's a technique I'll explain in just a little bit for identifying risk elements and assessing them. We're also going to show you a 4-quadrant risk analysis that goes with that to set priorities on risk, and introduce you to a framework for change management, and use those in terms of a little bit on procurement planning and how you can integrate risk into that. And then finally, we're going to illustrate, probably because in many ways this whole presentation is a checklist for you, but to reinforce really the value of checklists in managing risk and change. I'm delighted to be joined today by 2 colleagues and friends. One, John Adler, who just recently retired out of the Dallas area rapid transit agency, now is teaching for the National Transit Institute via Rutgers. John was a former, and I met John as a former chief procurement official from the state of Arizona, and some of the slides actually are borrowed from presentations on risk that John has done. The other is a colleague from who I know probably most closely as a fellow member of the Leadership Development Council or Committee for NIGP. As you can tell from her bio, Lourdes has had a rich amount of experience in a variety of organizations. She is a John Maxwell certified coach, an NIGP instructor, also teaches for the American Management Association. And she's the author of a book, great book, actually, I've read it, Procurement Methods, Effective Techniques. So welcome both Lourdes and John, and make sure your audio's on. So howdy. To see. Hey, John, and welcome, Lourdes. And
thank you, Richard. Good to be here.
We're really looking forward to this. These tend to be fairly conversational. We've got a fairly small group. I'll let you introduce yourselves in the breakouts. We'll have 2 that I use the system assigned membership to the groups, and you can introduce yourself for those that you may not know each other. And they're going to be joining us too, as will I, in this. So kind of let's get a little started. This is actually from my book in the introduction. I'll give you a few minutes just to read it, the introduction to risk and change. I discovered, and it was probably 20 years ago now, and I had a successful failure on an IT procurement with a cooperative procurement with the state of Utah. That change was one of the big things that, at least in our case, was probably the biggest source of risk in terms of what we encountered in the implementation. And that's really what at least caused me to put the 2 things together. We're going to hit the essential elements of this quote, the identification of risk, looking at the impact a little bit, and its likelihood, a little bit on the treatment of risk and how that's done in the context of our business and what we do. I got this from John. I thought it was a great quote from General Patton in World War II. Take calculated risks, and that's a lot different than being rash. I've given you the source of this in the handout for the session today that identifies the soldier that the medal was being given to. But it's a great quote, I think, that really in many ways captures what we do in risk management planning. NIGP has some good definitions here. I often tell people that are trying to get the certification, if you can understand the things that are in the NIGP dictionary and are conversant to those, I'd say you're 3/4 of the way to getting your certification. It's a great dictionary. These are the ideas that or the definitions for related terms, starting with what risk is, the chance of injury, damage, or loss, and the probability that that's going to happen. Those two things combined, as well as the impact of that, really lead to our assessments of what risk is. That consists of a process called risk analysis. We'll do a little of that today in the broader context of overall risk management and what that means. So take a look at those concepts whenever you are looking at a risk situation, and take a peek at that, because I think they're very good definitions. In the book, I describe, and we're going to use a couple of these two scenarios just for illustrations a little bit. I encountered this really big time in Colorado when I was doing private practice in Denver in a law firm that specialized in government contracting. And we did, when I came in, I was brought in, I figured out eventually, because I had the state experience, they were kind of thin. It was a national firm, but they were thin in state procurement, really pretty good in federal procurement. So they asked me to run an event. And the biggest part of this was getting started early. We'd start about 4 months early, kind of look and see what was happening, identify and confer with potential speakers, figure out a venue in Denver to have this, a place that would hold the 100 people that we usually had come from industry. About 30 days out, we'd begin drafting the flyer, developing some of the panel themes. We'd have a bunch of people that were participating in the panels, and get them lined up and call people and get moderators from the firm to sort of do what I'm doing here, and I'll do as part of the facilitation to move the panel discussions along. And then about 30 days out, this is where we started really thinking about what might go wrong. We had these in November normally. And as I look outside and I see what has happened with the snow on the ground here in Denver, we had issues with weather sometimes, but that was the best time to stay away from association events early part of November, but we had a little bit of risk with that. On about a month out, we'd be firming up room deposits, sending out the flyers, publishing the things that were handouts. These are in the days when we actually got together. We would have planning meetings or a lunch with the panelists. And then about 3 days before, we started doing what I would call taking a look a little bit more closely at the risk was, or what the risks were. We used handouts just in case we ended up with power failures on things like PowerPoints, handouts that you could speak from. We'd print those, make sure those packages were together. We'd share cell phone numbers among us. We'd contact and come up with alternate plans for what would happen if we had a speaker that couldn't come in and fly in from Washington, D.C., for example. How could we set that up with a wireless connection? And this was pre-Zoom, so this was a little bit harder to do with some of the capabilities, but this was kind of event planning for us in terms of looking at the risk as we moved through the project management phase and getting this all together so people were in the room, and tried to anticipate what would happen. This is something that you all probably ought to be or try to be familiar with. It's known as a 4-quadrant analysis. It's used among business people a lot in various contexts, like setting priorities, for example, in project management planning. I've seen a version of it for that. We're going to talk about it in a risk quadrant. And I got this from John Adler from presentation he's done on risk. And as you can see, and as I had indicated in my introduction to the book, chapter 8, the risk is really a product of two things. One is how bad are things going to be, the impact on one vertical, and the other is how probable is it that this is going to happen. And as you can see, there are 4 quadrants here. I usually think of the upper right as the high risk. That means high probability it's going to happen and a high impact if it does. Obviously, that's the types of things that you want to plan for a little bit more than some of the ones on the lower left, which would be a low risk situation. Yes, it's a possibility, but it's not likely to occur. And if it does, it's pretty easy to work around, that sort of thing. And then the other two we sometimes call the moderate risks, the high impact, low probability, or the high probability, but manageable impact. When I had asked John this morning, we were looking at this a little about his little descriptors here, and the upper right is easy to understand, reduce, the lower right. And John, I'll just shout out to you. You've got exercise tolerance on the high probability, low impact. What did you mean by that? I'm just curious.
I guess we should always be tolerant. That's probability is high, but impact is low. So to me, that means, oh, what the heck? If it happens, it happens. Just deal with it. I could probably add a lot more to this risk assessment chart. I kind of use this for my own notes. And I stole it from a number of other risk assessments. You can Google risk assessment matrix, and you'll find several good examples on the internet.
And it's amazing now, actually, what you can find on Google that way. A lot of the tools that I've identified. And Lourdes, as I recall, you've used 4-quadrant analysis too in different contexts, right? Yourself?
Yes, I have. And actually, just to kind of kick start, how much research I have to do in a particular procurement, how much more equipped I need to be.
Okay, it really helps us identify priorities in many ways. And so when you put what we had done in our planning in Colorado and Denver and put this in this, and I'm going to be honest with you, I probably didn't know much about 4-quadrant analysis at the time. I was teaching risk management for NIGP, but I can't say as we did this, but in some ways, this is a graphical depiction of what many times you do intuitively, and it's a great tool when you're in a team situation. If we had a venue fire in a hotel, obviously that's going to be a huge impact. The likelihood of that happen, probably not too much. But when we planned, we thought if we get a horrendous catastrophic failure, we'll just cancel. I mean, that was our risk management approach. We had all the emails, we had that available. Snowstorms, a little bit maybe less of an impact because not everybody's going to be affected the same way, but we had a pretty strong likelihood of that. And that's one thing that we did start talking about in terms of sharing emails, identifying where the speakers were coming from, knowing which parts of the state they'd be traveling from, or nationally, keeping track of that, keeping people appraised of what the event, it was a one-day event, by the way, and what the status was. What are the low ones? Oh, a laptop failure. That was easy to fix. We usually had multiple people in there with laptops we could swap out. It'd be a tough impact for a while, but and that happens, not a huge likelihood. But illnesses, internet loss, various things that and this was my way of putting this on in terms of what in an environment like this, you might want to focus on when you kind of go to the next steps of risk management on this. So let me just show you what a risk framework looks like. And there's going to be little twists on this that you'll see. You'll see if you take the Pathways course that I think maybe has just been released or it's imminent on risk management. They may put things in a little bit different order, but often the first phase is risk identification, and sometimes that's done through what I call, or what I've read about, it's called question storming. I mean, you sit down as a group and try to come up with the types of questions you want to ask or maybe events that you want to identify through brainstorming in terms of what types of risks are out there. And then the second part of this then will be the assessment, likelihood versus and times consequence. Impact is another way to say consequence. But we were talking this morning, getting ready for this. One of the things in my law practice when I was advising agencies is the whole idea of indemnification. An indemnification, and I've heard counsel from other companies say this more than once: we aren't going to bet the future of our company on, on a third-party claim rising out of performance. And they try to use that when they advocate for limitation liability, for example. Well, I would ask people, and I'm going to ask John and Lourdes this now. So if we give up indemnification, how many times have you actually in your practice ever seen that triggered so that it protected the government against liability or ultimate defense costs? And I think I asked John, and I think you told me how many times have you actually seen indemnity called?
I've been doing this for 40 years, and I can't recall an occasion where we went to that length.
Yeah. Lourdes, how about you?
Zero.
Yeah.
Zero time.
So here's a chance for audience participation. I wouldn't mind hearing from you all on this. If you have, I'm going to just take a look in the chat and see who has actually had. Has anybody ever had indemnity called where you had to go to a supplier and say, hey, we just got sued. This is your problem under the indemnification clause. It's not ours. I hear a never. I see a never. I see lots of silence. And that's something lawyers need to talk with you about, because they will actually then be able to let you know, here's what can happen. If we caused the fire through something that's happened, we may get sued by a third party, or if one of the suppliers, it's the food service supplier, starts a fire or something, we may get sued. But the likelihood of those things happening often isn't real huge. Now, I will tell you, since I'm not practicing law any longer and I'm 2 years inactive, this is not something you go and say, Richard said it's not a problem, because you're often going to have standard boilerplate in your contracts that have an indemnification clause to protect you against liability and defense costs. So don't be doing anything based on anything you hear here, but it explains why sometimes suppliers are coming back with limitation of liability clauses and trying to fence in a little bit what their ultimate liability is on things that might be very low probability, but could be high impact in terms of claims. The biggest thing right now probably is data breach, to be honest with you, in terms of impacts that people are facing, and you'll hear you are probably facing it, or some of your attorneys are. But that's an example of how the framework sort of gets in, because you start looking at the assessment likelihood, you look at how bad the outcomes will be from that, and then you figure out how to mitigate it. Do you handle it, just accept it? Like John just said, if you've got a moderate risk on one part of that quadrant, you might just accept it. Sometimes you transfer it, and we'll remind you of that a little bit. That's a clause sometimes in a contract, but these are risk mitigation techniques. So I want to put one other, go ahead, John.
Richard, I was just, your previous slide, just going back to the matrix, I saw the snowstorm there, and just a story. Several years ago, Dallas, we hosted the Super Bowl, and we had a snowstorm at the same time. It was an awful, awful fiasco. And our transit system shut down unexpectedly. And riders were left looking for buses and waiting for trains. But we had, our system was totally shut down. We had another severe weather event about a month ago, and in our risk assessment, we shut down before the event even started. And that way, and that was just part of the risk assessment. What do we do if we have a severe weather event? It is so severe, we shut down. All of our riders know there's no system, and they're not going to be waiting at bus stops and train stations. That's just an example of the kind of risk assessment we go through.
Now, I'm curious, you had two events that were sort of related, one before the other. Had you had that risk mitigation plan in place the first time?
Nope. but we
Yeah,
sure
so
did
you
the
you
second
learned,
time.
right? You learned,
Yes,
right?
sir, we sure did the second time.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I had the little circle in there, because we learn from these events and then you make adjustments, things. Great example. Great example, John. And so maybe we've already answered this. So if I had to ask you that, those are you that are in chat, why is this part of the circle here returning to risk identification? What do you think? Anybody in chat? Why do we have a circle that goes back to risk identification and then starts the process over? Any thoughts? Enter it in chat. Lessons learned. Yeah, big time that John had. I mean, they learned from a snow event in Dallas that is so unusual, and their risk mitigation was don't put people at risk, and let's get the word out, shut down, and not do it. Risk is ongoing, and you never really stop this. There's always a monitoring phase where you're always re-looking at the current conditions. We did as simple in our little event, checking the weather forecast, trying to figure out where people are going to be impacted, or is there a chance there's going to be an airline shutdown, the rest of that. So it's a big time relevant issue in what we do in procurement. One of the ways that we do this is, and this is a tool we're going to practice now. This was really introduced to the world in a popular way by somebody called Gary Klein, an author, added to by two authors named Dan and Chip Heath that wrote a book called Decisive, which I really recommend. It's cited in your handout. And a pre-mortem is a way to get to these sort of events. You essentially study and understand the contours of your project, and you ask everybody, imagine a fiasco where this is going to have a catastrophic failure, or in the less likely case, it's going to succeed, but it's going to overwhelm our capacity, But more often what's happening is you're trying to identify catastrophic failures, and then each person answers this question: what would have caused the fiasco? What would have, in your own mind, what it would have done? And you're able then from that to identify risk events and make judgments about where those fit in terms of likelihood, and have that discussion. It's called a pre-mortem. And what we're going to do is let you do one. So this will be in the activity I sent you. You should all receive. Activity 1 is going to be a pre-mortem, and this is going to be an event, and we're going to make this realistic, and that is your chapter is decided. They've missed 2, one for a hurricane, one last year because everybody was shutting down for the pandemic. You're losing revenue. You want to have your spring event, and you've decided to hold it. It's your largest revenue source. You've typically been supported by the supplier community. You're going to get together and just do a pre-mortem now on managing risk in this case. I have promised my guests that they aren't required to be the ones to do the report out afterwards. Okay, so they're going to join you and participate any way they want to. But what I'd like you to do is have one person, when you go into your room, ask this question: what do you think? And start the dialogue among yourselves. Do a pre-mortem, and I've got the steps. The full steps are in the activity, but essentially you're trying to get everybody just to state, I'm imagining a failure. Here's what I think a failure would look like and the reasons, and identify what those are. And then after you get that, talk among yourselves a little bit about what's the likelihood, what's the potential impact. And we'll just use the 4-quadrant analysis right now to come up where that is going to fit on the quadrant, and in terms of likelihood and impact. Identify someone who will come to the front of the room. I've got a whiteboard. We're going to let you post on the whiteboard what you thought were a couple events and where they fit on the risk matrix. And so we'll do that as soon as we get out of the room. Come back, everybody. So admittedly, these are 2-hour labs, but it gives you an idea of what it's like to run a pre-mortem on an event. And so what I'd like to do is we like to teach you a couple things when we do these. One is how to use the technology. And so any luck at all, I've shared a screen that's got a whiteboard. You see it? This is a 4-quadrant whiteboard. And I've got impact on the left side, likelihood on the bottom. And the more likely it occurs, it goes to the right, highest impact goes up, and that means it's a high risk at the upper right. What I'd like you to do is, you can do this on your kind of on your own, is if you look at the top of your screen, there's a view button. And if you click on the view, you'll see an annotate feature. And the annotate will give you a little series of menus, and probably the one to use. I mean, you can draw if you've got great handwriting, but there's a text box, and if you place the text box where you want to, type in a short description of what the event was that you identified as something that would kind of cause a failure of the event, and put it where you think it belongs as you all talked about it. And if you didn't have a chance to talk about it, just make something up and we'll talk about it. Don't worry, I can move it around. Okay, I see technology. Wow, okay, we got some people that got this one. Technology failure, okay, a little difference of opinion, but obviously in terms of likelihood, but I see lots there on impact. Anybody? Travel disruption cancellation. There you go. Any others that you talked about? Distraction of the audience. Help. Yeah, good. Bad weather. Good. And I'm going to slide those around a little bit because I can. What else? Any low ones that you talked about, or did everybody just yeah, big problem on speaker cancellations. That happens. And you'd want to probably come up with a plan about how you're going to do that. Internet server. I am running here with two. I have my home one, and then I've got a Verizon Jetpack that I use as a backup in case I run into problems with these. That's my way to manage risk. I wondered if anybody would come up with low attendance. Are people sick of the virtual environment? Have they, for 2 years, you haven't had a value? Is that, that's probably a fair one. And virtual attendance, which is probably a related concept. Cool. So this is an example of the use of a pre-mortem to identify events. And I'm going to save this now, by the way. By the way, when you ever do this, you can save the whiteboard too. It saves as an image under a folder called Zoom. Under Documents, there's a Save button up on the little menu. And when you hit save, it'll say save via PNG, and you go find that it's on your Zoom. So it's a kind of a cool little thing. So thanks. We often talk in terms of procurement risk. Technical means the ability, and in my successful failure, we had a technical risk issue that I didn't account for, and that was that they couldn't meet their proposal promises to give us what we needed in terms of a catalog solution. Schedule is how much risk in terms of being able to get it done in the time you need it. And market research is something you're going to want to have to take care of that. And then cost and price risk means they're going to blow out the, you're not going to be able to do it within the budget, which is always an issue too. So I am big, and I say this throughout the book, on the fact that the checklists don't give you all the knowledge you need, but they help you avoid missing things. And that's what you're trying to do with it, some kind of a checklist. I know, Lourdes, you had checklists, a range of checklists, as I recall, when you were working in Chicago and Houston.
Yes, specifically in Chicago, they had a really good checklist, and they updated as regulations or ordinance changed, and it was easy to see the history and the timeline of that particular procurement, and throughout, all the way to inception, if you were dealing with an amendment. And it was very, very effective to get the big picture. So yeah. And to make sure that you didn't miss a step. So by the time you got to legal review, everything was there.
And I'm just guessing, I know we've got a few representatives from transit agencies. John was, I'm guessing that when auditors come in, they're looking for that sort of thing too, to indicate that you've actually completed the essential tasks. Is that a fair statement, John? Just curious.
Yeah, and we also, I mean, we had a checklist for each procurement. And it followed, the auditors had a similar checklist that they would use when they went through our procurements. But we also used a tool in Microsoft Project to plan the procurement and with milestones, and so that we can measure progress.
Yeah, great. So
Okay.
thanks. The other thing, now we've been through and identified risk, get a sense for what the likelihood is, the impact, but then you got to figure out, based on the potential outcomes of those events, how you're going to handle it. Sometimes you just you're going to have to just control it and reduce the likelihood it's going to happen. I mean, for example, the problems with the laptop failures. You try to get new laptops or ones that aren't going to fail, and you test it that way. But that's a control issue that you might be able to do. You try to avoid it, obviously. You assume it sometimes. You just don't, we had to assume the risk on snow. I don't have a beeline to the person that figures out if we're going to get snow dumped on us. So we just had to assume it and then come up with strategies to kind of mitigate and control the effect of it. And sometimes you transfer it. I mentioned contract clauses sometimes are doing that. You're allowing the others. And in some sense, we're going to talk about after we have a little conversation here between Lourdes and John and I, and sometimes the way you approach a procurement and what you do with respect to requirements and evaluations is sort of lining up the idea of some kind of transfer of risk and asking companies, the ones that are doing the offers or the proposers, to assume some of that. One of the better examples of the use of change management and incorporating that, because to me, change and the resistance to change is a risk. And some of you inherent in the "we aren't going to attend" part of the exercise kind of hit on that, because the resistance of people to change sometimes is one of the highest risks, especially in a procurement. I saw that in my successful failure with the state of Utah and a cooperative. And I saw a great example 10 years ago in Arizona that used the elements of change management to sort of minimize the effect of resistance to change on this. And this was after John, I think, had left as a procurement director. The director at the time was Gene Clark, who just recently retired as the head of the NIGP Code and Consulting arm. So what she was able to do, because she knew that this was going to be new, and they were trying to get local governments involved in this too. And so they first had to come up with what they kind of call the formal case for the need for change. They had just come out of the 2008 financial Great Recession, I guess we call it. And they were having trouble with revenues. They needed to find cost savings, ways to be more efficient. And one of the things they kind of cast that as is a sense of urgency. It was sort of built in. She got the right people on the team, which is an important part of any kind of change management. Now, you try to find people, especially if you're running pilots and you've got a core team, people that are constructive, that are positive, that are going to challenge your thinking and help you think critically, but they've got a good attitude about it. They're enthusiastic about it. She had a project manager actually from the IT department, and she was able to sort of blast out of that department and get to help her. That was a big part of the success of them. And she had an elevator speech. I mean, her elevator speech, if I had to paraphrase, was in 1983, we adopted the American Bar Association Procurement Code, which was a fundamental change, the Model Procurement Code, in our governance of procurement in Arizona. And this is going to be probably more transformational to be able to build in efficiencies to help ordering, to make catalog items available to people so that we can finally get a handle on statewide spend and save everybody money. She had an elevator speech and she communicated it consistently. She also was the one who prepared for unexpected obstacles. They were down through, I think, 2 phases of the implementation. A statute came down that levied new accounting requirements on the state as a whole. She lost some of her IT support because they shifted over to what had become a new governor's priority. She went and then to some agencies that understood the financial system that they were trying to integrate with and got some help from elsewhere outside of the traditional centralized IT. She was the obstacle solver on this. She piloted it, came up with some short success stories that they could advertise, and then built on those. And she involved every layer of the state, really, and also local governments in the implementation, from the senior executives that she was part of the steering committee on, to the users that were running the pilots. What I'd like to do is go into a conversation now, and I'm going to stop the share on this for right now. A conversation among Lourdes and John and I. I'm delighted to have you here to share your perspective. I know Lourdes is deep in the change management side, and I've seen what John put together for presentations on risk, and I'm pretty astounded by what both of you are doing. But if you don't mind, you all will ask a few questions and get their insights on these. And beginning with, this was one I asked Lourdes, were you surprised when I put risk and change management on the same title? I'm just curious.
And my response, my reaction was yes. You normally don't immediately jump into the risk portion of it, of change, but it's really risk is an element of change when you think about it, but you normally think about it in terms of big losses. Like, is the contractor not going to be able to complete the work, or is it going to go belly up, or all those kinds of like big risks that are generally covered by insurance or bonding or whatever. But when I think about the transformations that I led, I had certainty in my ability to lead them, and second, the potential of the group that I was leading. And so from that perspective, I did not see, and even though other people saw and looked at me and said, well, that's never going to happen, or, how are you going to do that? I had the certainty from the experience that we were going to be able to accomplish it. And I think that, the reason why risk is sort of associated with change is because there's a lack of certainty in some of the things that you're planning to undertake, because if you don't have that certainty, you have doubt in your ability to get it accomplished.
Yeah.
So
John, I when we were talking about this too, you had an interesting comment, and you said that we assess risk all the time, and it's part of what we do as professionals in our process. And I build on that a little. Do you use, or do you see the need for formal tools in kind of risk management, for example?
Well, not for everything. There's risk involved with everything we do. I guess there's change and risk involved with everything we do. So if I'm cooking breakfast, I got risk of burning the toast. If I'm setting the valves on my old car, I've got the risk of setting them wrong and poking a hole in a piston. So there's risk involved in everything. Working on the car, I use a checklist. Here's the tools I'm going to need. I get them all laid out before I start. Here's the parts I got to buy before I start on it. In doing a procurement, I think you do need formal tools. I'm thinking of a checklist, a project plan, setting your goals and objectives, kind of your roadmap.
We're going to turn now and kind of bend into, after we look at these formal tools that you mentioned and some that we've introduced them to, that we're going to start looking at integrating more completely the risk concept into procurement planning. And I know Lourdes was curious. We were talking about the utility of risk and change management concepts in RFP development and evaluation. And you use the term wiggle room to as emphasizing the importance of having some wiggle room in specifications, and share that with us. I thought that was interesting.
Well, in that wiggle room, it's really associated with allowing the expertise to come into the mix. Sometimes, and I've seen this in some agencies, that the RFPs, which are supposed to be looking for a solution, and then it assumes that the expertise is elsewhere, they try to make it so restrictive and so specific that there is no room for those best practices that are learned somewhere else to come into your pipeline, your environment. And so that's what I mean by wiggle room. You have certain objectives that you want to meet. Aside from those objectives, again, the means and methods are the contractors own that, or the consultants own that. But they have been in more than one agency implementing a similar system, or let's say a system. Well, they have had experiences that we haven't had. So why don't we leave it, try to accomplish our goals, be specific what the end result that we want, not in terms of number of cells or anything, but what is it that we want to be able to do functionally? What is our objective? And let the other party, the one that brings the expertise, to tell us what are some ways that we can even enhance what we're trying to accomplish. We just have to be clear in our objective. And that's what I mean by wiggle room, not box ourselves in a corner and then not be able to. One example that I can think of is I went to an agency where they implemented an ERP that it was supposed to be state of the art. By the time it was implemented, it was obsolete, and there was no way of changing it because they had boxed themselves into a corner because they were so specific on what they wanted. And so, the agency limped along for a long time because, the ERP is a huge investment. So that's really what I mean.
And building on that with John, you've talked about the same concept in performance-based contracting, where you aren't necessarily being prescriptive on exactly what the requirements are. You are trying to build on their expertise to identify it. But to me, the issue with that is, and I'm going to ask you, I guess, does that then implicate risk and change management concepts in trying to evaluate those kinds of proposals where they've had wiggle room and you haven't prescribed exactly what you want done? How does risk and change management fit into that?
Well, I want to go back on what Lourdes said. Performance-based requirements, performance-based specifications, outcome-based, whatever you want to call them. If you tell the contractor how to do its job and the contractor follows your instructions and it doesn't work, is it the contractor's fault? Who is responsible? In design build type contracting, that's exactly the concept in construction contracting.
Yeah, let's hear from the audience. I'm just curious. You just posed a great question, and I wouldn't mind hearing in chat what you think. If you have told the contractor exactly what to do and it is done and it doesn't work, who bears that risk? We do, don't we? If you've told them what to do,
we bear the responsibility. Yeah. There's an old 1918 court case. I love this thing. It's called the Spearin versus United States government. And the contractor Spearin did the work just like the government told him, followed the plans and specs exactly. But there was a defect. There was something wrong that the government didn't know and the contractor could not discover. And in that case, I believe the outcome was that the government is responsible for its specifications. And if they don't work, it's the government
Yeah.
that's responsible for the damages caused to the contractor.
What Lourdes brought up and what you're talking about in performance-based RFPs, for example, you're asking for their expertise that we often don't have, right? I mean, we are looking at a proposal, may be very innovative. We're trying to evaluate it. What role does risk and change management play in your ability to look at what they're proposing and make judgments about the merits of the proposals?
Well, in a way, our evaluation of proposals is an assessment of the probability of success. So we're trying to pick the proposal that's most likely to be successful, or to produce a successful outcome. And so the opposite side of that is we're assessing their risk in achieving that desired outcome. So that's really evaluating proposals in a way as a risk assessment in itself.
Do you talk to industry about what's possible and the rest of that? I'm just curious.
Well, isn't that part of your market research?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Is going out to the industry and finding out what's out there. Sometimes it helps to do a pre-RFP invitation of some kind. We called it a request for innovation, a request for ideas, or here's our objective. Here's what we're trying to do. How would you, as an industry, propose to do that? How would you accomplish that?
Lourdes, thoughts? Now,
Yeah,
a lot there to unpack. Yeah.
There's a RFI, especially for the more complex projects that we're trying to get ideas on how to structure it without getting so specific that we then shoot ourselves in the foot. So and then from that market research, whether you do it through an RFI or whatever, what are your thoughts aligning with the market? Because that's another thing. It's like, we think of this great ideas to make it easier on the agency to manage those contracts, but is that how the market works? So that, whether it's the compensation, whether it's the way they deliver, whether it's, whatever it is. And so that's the value of having those conversations before you develop those solicitations, so that there is full alignment, and then the risk drops because now they can come in and, based on their experience, which is how they conduct their business, can help us achieve our goals. And so
Great. I think what I'd like to do is, because I want to move us on to our final session, is kind of ask you to, if in the context of risk and my theme, by the way, on this is there are ways to conduct evaluations to try to assess whether or not an offer really understands both the risk components that you're interested in and also the change components. And we'll practice that here in just a little bit. But I would like to ask you both, if you had to pick the one thing in terms of integrating risk and change management concepts into procurements, and pick the one thing that you would identify as the most important. I know it's hard. What would it be? John, what would it be if you had one thing?
One thing that I recommend we always ask proposers for complex projects is what risks do you see, and how would you address those risks? What are the risks to success, and how would you address those risks?
And if, I'm just curious, if change and resistance to change was something you had experienced in the past as being a significant part of that, would you ask them about that too?
Sure. And one outcome of that is, in a couple of contracts, the contractors are brought in a change management expert, somebody to help us go through the change management process. Of course, they charge us for it.
Okay, great. Same question to you, Lourdes. If you had to pick the one tip for people that are watching, and when you're working in this risk and change management space, what would it be?
I think that I would pick a tool, and our biggest tool is our intellectual faculties, the imagination, reason, memory, and to a certain extent, discernment and will and intuition, to really use all that is already within us, that it's within our power to then imagine what could go wrong, what could, and how can we mitigate that risk so that we can work backwards. And that future memory that we're creating, that pre-mortem, it's already we're already putting things, measures in place to take care of it before it does happen.
As procurement professionals, a lot of times we measure success on getting the contract awarded, and then we can just walk away and let our customer deal with it. And true success is not awarding the contract, it's getting to that contract outcome that we're pursuing. And that means close contract administration. It means constant communication with the contractor and our project manager.
Yeah.
And measurement.
And another comment was in here, how do you get buy-in? That was one of the things Arizona did well. And actually, in my successful failure, we were actually doing that fairly well. We had constructive users as part of the core team and the pilots that became advocates. I mean, but you got to pick them right. I mean, you know who the ones are that are naysayers and it'll never work and the rest of that. We had some great people that they knew it was hard and they were honest about it. And we finally terminated the project because it just wasn't going to get us what we needed. But they were constructive. They were, and having those people on the team is a key to getting the buy-in from the rest of the entity. So, great.
And communication is key there.
Yeah.
You have to be able to not just put out information, but actually communicate and connect with a different level so that they become engaged and they take ownership of whatever portion it is that corresponds to them, that they have to act upon to actually effect the change.
Yeah. I've got us behind a little bit on this, so I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead and we welcome, obviously, great insight, great comments, and we'll have a chance to share a little bit more as we move into the final breakout. But what I wanted to do now is get a little bit more. We introduced the change management piece, and now we're going to kind of fill in the back story here a little bit on concepts of change management, how you're intentional about things, and then roll into a little bit on RFP design and how you might be able to use the offerors or the proposer's understanding of these things to better assess whether they understand the requirement, whether they've got a sound approach, or whether they're just reading book stuff to you. I mean, I'm sure many of you have had that happen. You ask for what, in the context of our project, what do you see as, like John said, what do you see as the main issues with risk? Or in Lourdes's world, we've encountered resistance before. How do you go about it? And if you get the narrative back that looks like they read it out of a book, then that helps you understand whether they know really what you need and your project. I don't know where I learned this once I heard somebody say that when you reduce sometimes change, the resistance to change, it often comes down to three questions. And one is, what's in it for me? Especially in, I think John used the term private partners, public partnerships, where sometimes people are wondering, is my job at risk here? I mean, is the whole purpose here is to build efficiency, so I go away? So, that's the what's in it for me part of this. And am I able? Are you asking me to do things technologically that I haven't been trained for? And I really probably am not able. And then the second is, do I trust your motivations? I mean, are you lying to me? Are you really being honest about where this is going to end up? So if you're ever, I like these as things to remember when you're ever in a situation when you as a team are having to work on a project that is going to involve resistance to change. In the book, and I won't go through the whole thing now, this is one of the longer stories spread through the book, was put to go to Florida, that now this has been 10 years, but they didn't have a P card system. And they had a manual paper payment system, no procurement cards. And they among other things, in terms of process analysis and use of Six Sigma and some tools that we talked about in prior learning labs, they also looked at the change element. And this is a common tool that is used in change management analysis. It's called a force field analysis, where you try to identify as a team what the supporting forces are to help you and what the ones against the change are. For example, one supporting force is the auditing function. They're going to love to be able to have an electronic system or an automatic system that helps in the auditing. That would be at least on the auditing side, perhaps a 4 that you can leverage on change and maybe get some auditors involved in the core team. Spend analysis. Now we're going to be able to actually give you information on how much everybody's spending on various categories of supplies and services against. There's our people that are going to say, you know what, this is just an invitation for fraud in the procurement card. That we went through that for a lot of years, people that were against it. And when you see the against parts on a force field that are impeding your ability to change, then you've got to come up with strategies, and ideally ask the supplier to come up and help with strategies to do this. Lack of support. That was one of the reasons for my failure 20 years ago. The users didn't want to use a catalog system that, even though it would aggregate spend, made them use something other than the Dell and the Corporate Express and the systems that they were accustomed to, and they complained to their executives, and the executives complained to the governor, and the support eroded. We've got to find strategies, and I probably could have been better at trying to do that myself, like Jean Clark did. She had a relationship in Arizona with key executives and was always talking about what the benefits were and being honest with people. Force field. I've given you an article. I think you should read it. I'm a fan of John Cotter's change management models. This has a lot of those same concepts in what I've given you in the handout. I did all this in Word for a reason, so you can actually use fair use principles and adapt these to your own uses if you need to. You just want to make sure that you give people credit for this. This is available online, the whole article. I've taken out some of the pieces here. Let me just stop a minute here, Lourdes. I know you're heavy into change management, transformation theories. Anything in here that either surprised you or that you want to emphasize in terms of importance out of these? I'm just curious.
Well, I think that creating ownership is it's key. You cannot change people. They have to make that decision on their own. And in order to do that, they have to feel like they have ownership of that change. And in order to do that, then you need strong leadership to be able to get to that. And of course, it goes back to the leader. So I think one thing that I would include here is strong leadership, because they are the ones who are going to sort of shape the culture or set the tone for the culture. And so all of these have an element of leadership in them. And without a strong leader, because you can't make people do stuff. I mean, you could have leverage and ask them to do something, then they will. But in a change environment, when you're going through change, you need people to do more than they're being asked to do, because there's always more. And so just sending down the change and thinking that everyone's going to just do it, you'll get that passive aggressiveness back. Yeah. So it's important to get that buy-in first of the leader, and then buy-in of the actual change, and then take ownership so that they see themselves in the picture and carrying the baton.
Yeah, and I mean, the great insight in many of these are leader activities among team activities. I mean, a team needs to go to their leader and say, hey, we need some buy-in from the top. We're not feeling it. Can you do something to support us as a team? And that's a big part of that. John, any thoughts as you heard Lourdes speak and see this list? Just curious.
No, I'm with Lourdes on that.
Okay, that's good answer. Okay,
I do like involve every layer.
Yeah.
The more heads you can get involved in it, the better.
Yeah, and that's and that goes from the team that's dealing with users and individual pilot users all the way up to the executives, where leaders often are going to have to be part of this. We're going to now talk and move into the timing of the risk assessments. And when I use this now, I'm using it broadly. I mean, I'm using broad to include a risk to include the element of resistance to change. I encountered that in my e-procurement system implementation with the state of Utah. We had a heavy component of we had technical risk too that was a problem, but we also had resistance, and to me that's part of it. And the purpose of this is to let you understand that when you're looking at risk, you start looking in the beginning. I mean, in procurement planning, I heard John say market research is where you find out certain things. If you're trying to assess terms and conditions risk, you start asking them, how has this industry changed in terms of the use of limitation liability? That's a lawyer type thing. How about phased implementation? And I think you try to find strategies for finding out where industry is during the planning phase, the pre-award phase. You use the techniques that you have during the RFP process. If you haven't been to any of the RFP learning labs, go to those. I think they're talking more about these ideas in terms of information exchange during the evaluation and award stage, and then post-award. I heard John, he's already said it, contract administration and monitoring. I mean, there are going to be changes in the context to your risk environment from things that are happening during performance. You've got to stay plugged in, to those things. And so what, I guess the through line in this stage is there isn't one place where this idea of intentionality in looking at risk and change management in a procurement, there's not one place it belongs. It really runs through, I think, everything. I heard John say that we ask contractors to identify risk. And if I was to do this again, and I didn't do this back 10 years ago, I would have said, do you anticipate resistance? Because here's the way the world has worked in our state for a long time. We've had decentralized procurement. Everybody has their own favorite little places that they go buy stuff. For us to come in with a catalog system and say, we're trying to achieve a statewide aggregated spend analysis capability. We're trying to use catalogs for small purchases. Are you anticipating risk? And we would have loved, I think, to have heard what people would have said on that. And that's going to let you know if people have experience. Here is a way to do it on proposal instructions, just an example. Here is a way on this slide to put the basis for evaluation. We're going to include our judgment about the potential risk of unsuccessful or untimely performance and the amount of our involvement. I mean, we can probably get it done successfully, but are we going to have to hire a whole new division to do the work that we hope that it does? And add it to evaluation standards. A fair risk. Here's an example of one I've used in the past. We see a moderate risk of unacceptable or late performance, and our involvement won't exceed what we really expect in the contract administration. I mean, we can't sit on our hands and do nothing, but our judgment is, having read the proposal and what they've said, that those are going to be give us or illuminate some of the considerations about how we see the risk. And again, I see risk to include not just change management. Here is an example of criteria for good on technical and past experience. And what I've added in the last couple decades now is the idea of the risk as a way of looking at that and making judgments, low and high and those types of things. And it's a judgment. I mean, it's a judgment that's written into the evaluation criteria. I typically separate technical and things like resumes and past experience because they are a little bit different, but I don't go through on factors and write a different set of standards for everyone. I just use a generic technical and past experience demonstrated capability. And this has survived procurements without having successful protests. So that. And this is the checklist. And this is a checklist that I've given you in the materials, in your handouts. We're going to apply that now just a little bit and get you started on a thinking about how to integrate risk considerations and change management. How does it work? Well, you might ask, identify the key risk that you see in success. And what's the impact on the project from your perspective? And how do you see addressing that? Is it going to be things that we need to do, that you need to do? Or are we going to share responsibilities? Identify those things. And if there's a change component, identify if you think there's resistance and what are your strategies. And this gives you some ideas of the types of things that you may read about that people will do in the context of your project. Again, you don't want to go and open up a book and find out they've copied a bunch of stuff without adapting it to what your project is, but ask them these kinds. And then finally, we understand that after you're off the project, the monitoring and controlling perhaps will be over, but during the project implementation, what do you do to monitor and control? These are approaches to integrate risk considerations. So with that, what we're going to do is our last exercise. It's the second activity on page 3 of the activity handout. And it basically is an ERP system that's got some new twists in it. One is it's going to use something called a challenge-based RFP, which is much what Lourdes described and much what John has used the term performance-based contracting, where you're giving a broad statement of objectives, but you're not going to tell them how to do stuff. You're asking them to give you a proposal, and you're going to assess the relative merits. Now, what I've decided to do, instead of trying to get you to write an RFP because we don't have any time, is we're going to make an industry days out of this. And what you've decided is, from this overall arching objective, you're going to invite industry to come with users, and you're going to sit in a room. Let's pretend we have those now. And you're going to lead a tabletop discussion with users and suppliers about questions that might be decent ones to ask in an RFP to help you get to whether they understand the risks, maybe the change management challenges. And I've built in some things based on my experience that could be change management challenges, including a prior failure 6 years ago. You tried this once, didn't work, had a lot of resistance. So your mission is over the next 15 minutes is to talk about these the questions that you would probably pose as a facilitator at a tabletop discussion about how would we get to understanding whether you understand our project, your approach is sound, given the risks and the change challenges you think are involved. What kinds of things might you ask in that kind of discussion? So I don't need you to try to write RFP language, although some of these questions could end up being in an RFP, right after you have the train the trainer obligation, which we often have. You might be saying then in a question, tell us during that kind of training how you would train us on overcoming the resistance that we're likely to encounter, or do you see any? I mean, that sort of thing. So what you're going to do is we're going to have industry days. You're going to go to your little session here now and meet with vendors and you're trying to plan kind of how you're going to facilitate that with the other people on your team. Again, somebody started off by saying, what do you think? I mean, what are good questions to ask in a roundtable like this? I'm also going to assume that you don't have a prohibition, because that would make the meeting really small. If you don't have a prohibition on meeting suppliers in that way, I think you could do industry days. A lot of them do it. So you got it. Yeah. So this is industry days. So obviously you're not going to import what they're giving you and make it part of the RFP. There's issues with that too, but you're trying to get their thoughts on the general questions like that. So I think that's a great one. you would probably say, we think that you're going to propose something cloud-based. That's what they all are now. What are the risks just with that? So that part, good one. Oh, in an industry days, you're probably going to say, because there's going to be competitors sitting there too, right? I mean, there's probably more. So one that would be, that question would be, well, if we asked you to describe to us the method of integrating the current, is that a reasonable question? I mean, and what are the risks associated with that if we ask you that? So when you're sitting in an industry day, you've got to realize that, a lot of them are going to be, has any of this ever happened to anybody? They're all afraid to talk because somebody else is going to get their trade secrets, Great. I think that's a great way to say that. And then on the risk chain part of this, because I know schedule risk is one of the ones typically, I mean, we're thinking of, whatever it is you're thinking of a 9-month implementation phase. I mean, it's probably okay to say it. What do you think of that? Is that a unrealistic? I mean, are we at risk by trying to spread it out 9 months, or are we at risk by trying to compress it more than reasonable? What are your thoughts on that? So, great. Let me ask you, John had brought up contract administration, and one of the things that you look at when you assess risk is whether or not you're going to be excessively entangled to try to make this thing success. Would you want to talk to industry about what are the expectations of us in terms of what are we going to have to do? Anything the supplier can tell you about contract administration to address the potential risks in administration? Or is that all on you and there's nothing that the contractor can do to help you with contract administration? So now, and I'm going to go and run with that. So the question would be, instead of you designing all of those things, would you ever ask for recommendations about a communication plan from them in terms of how often they should meet, who should be at them, so you can assess whether they understand the complexity of it or not? I'm building on what Lourdes said, at a seed question on industry day could be, would it be out of line to ask in an RFP for you to identify what the key resistance points are by users of a systems like this, and then to ask you to address what your strategy is for meeting those in terms of that? That would be an example of a industry day type question where you'd have users and suppliers. So welcome back, everybody. So we've got a few minutes here before we end. Wouldn't mind you if you can go ahead and send who you identified as the person to come to the front of the room and put a question on that you might ask at the at this industry days. You've got a supplier sitting there. I did mention to one of the groups I dropped in on that they're probably going to have competitors there too. So often you want to style a question in a way that's not going to scare off people too much. But what would be an example of a question? The whiteboard's open. If you look at the top at view, pick annotate, and then select the text and type it in. Talk about technical risk. We're really pretty good at asking technical risk questions like, do you offer a mobile app? Is it a cloud-based? But if we're trying to assess the chances that we're going to have excessive entanglement in contract administration to see that it's acceptable, how do you dig down deeper into those kinds of things? Just curious. I think that's a good one. What other public entities using? You know what I used to ask? What's an example of a good solicitation? You might have not won, but you thought it was a good solicitation. That gets them thinking. Level of support after implementation, good. Did any of you talk about resistance in this? Because there was a prior failure, people didn't like it. I mean, unless you're going to be the one that solves all these problems, you might want to ask, an implementation approach that would be, how do you see resistance? Is it fair to ask you in an RFP, you suppliers, about do you anticipate implementation resistance, and what do you do to solve that? And what's our role in this? What's the expectations? I think somebody grabbed that. Presentations to stakeholders. Not sure who that would be, but would you, I mean, when you're asking suppliers in industry day, if we have a oral presentation, are you used to seeing presentations to stakeholders and senior management? How does that help? Why? Because that builds, what's that? Every layer of buy-in, involvement. There's a technical question again, security protocol in the cloud. So a lot of those, and what I was trying to get at here was the issue of just risk and change, and what are you going to do, supplier, to do that? So we've got a feeling on this. I had a good discussion in room one about contract administration, and what I was proposing that I got some pushback on, which is fine, but asking them, is contract administration all our problem, or do you have best practices that you propose to mitigate the chances that requirements are going to get off skew, or that rest of that? What is your communication plan? How often do you think we ought to be meeting as a project team? You're assessing them, and you start hearing them, and if they say, well, just every 2 months, well, then you've got risk. I mean, and that the supplier is not evaluating it. But I like this test platform. How do you, how long in the industry? Yeah, I think that's good. Do you do demonstrations? Is that part of the thing? And why does that help us? Well, because now we'll know what your features are. So great. Trying to get you to look at, other than pure technical issues, what are the risks, and how can the supplier help us identify those? Whether risk from change resistance, from technical, how is it fair to ask them to identify those key risks, and then what their plan is to mitigate that risk? I mean, what are they going to say? Are they going to say, we're going to write a clause, it's all your responsibility? Well, that's not a great answer, so, because they're the experts on this. What I wanted you all to know is that the reason I have guests and people like Lourdes and John is I want you all to be exposed to who I call the stars in the profession, and Lourdes and John are. And I see a chat on performance contracts should meet weekly with stakeholders to ensure the project is on task with the project plan. And I think that's a great idea. The thing I would say is ask them what they recommend in their experience to make these successful in terms of performance meetings. I think it's okay to ask them what that is. And then if you got a problem with what they say, allow a proposal revision before you get to the final award to let them clarify it, but have a discussion about it. But I thought those are great ideas. The last session, NIGP is going to make a free webinar. And what we've done is use what I have come up with as lateral leadership principles for people. And this one, in terms of risk and change management, I think implicates many here, but other principles, but using just enough structure to help organize thinking and action, being intentional about the looking at risk management and looking at change management and how that integrates into your system. We will have a webinar that is addressed primarily to lateral leadership in teams. And that'll be in May. Look on the webinar sites, and welcome you to come and see that. But you saw two lateral leaders today, and they started in small groups and have worked their way and scaled out into leadership in larger organizations, and we're fortunate to have them. I want to thank Lourdes and John for being part of this conversation, right? Thanks, Lourdes.
Been a
Thank
pleasure.
you, John.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. And
This is fun.
thank you, everybody, for coming. I hope you learned something you didn't know before, which is usually my benchmark for this, and maybe a little bit about Zoom you hadn't used before. But this has been a delight for me. I tell, usually the fun I have is talking to them before we have these sessions. So I've really enjoyed that. And I want to thank you for your engagement. So any questions, let me know, and I'll be happy to chat with any about it. And so thank you, everyone, for coming, and I'll give you the rest of the day off. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.